Hello Year 10s and welcome to the first video that I'm making for you for 2018, and on this it's going to be on Macbeth. And by Macbeth I mean the real Macbeth, the historical Macbeth, not the Macbeth that Shakespeare turns into a play and gets some of the historical aspects of it deliberately wrong for story and plot effects. So we're going to look at this as the real life Macbeth. So this is the modern day map of Scotland. And the area that we are going to look at in this story is up and around here. So there's the modern day city of Aberdeen, Dundee, St Andrews, down here into Edinburgh, and over here is Glasgow. So this is all defined as the highlands around here, and this is all the lowlands area. In the story of Macbeth that Shakespeare wrote, he identifies various locations, the main one being Cawdor and Glam, and it's pronounced Glam, and that's how Macbeth is addressed at the beginning of the story by the witches. Hail Thane of Cawdor, hail Thane of Glam. And a Thane is an earl, so the modern day version would be he was an earl. We may also read the title of Mormaer, but we'll go with the title of Thane, and that's how Macbeth is described. And his area was, like I said, all over around here, and it was his job to protect it. From the Vikings. The Vikings had been raiding for a few hundred years prior to the time of Macbeth, and in fact the King of England at the time was of Viking descent, and so the Vikings were raiding all through the coasts and the isles of Scotland. And in the story of Macbeth that we'll be reading, Macbeth is actually fighting the Vikings and doing a good job, because the idea was the Vikings just genuinely wanted to conquer everywhere. At the time, the border was through here, but today the modern day border is down here. So this is the whole area that was down here is modern day Scotland, but at the time that was all the Scotland of the 11th century. And here's another map, I love my maps, of Scotland, but with the Gaelic names. So Macbeth was of Gaelic Celtic background. He was not a modern day Scot that you might think about today. So all of these places here, the names have changed slightly over time to become what we would now know as the modern day city of Aberdeen, or down here is Scone, or Dundee, or Athol, or Fife. There's where the modern day city of Edinburgh is, and that's where you can see what it was originally called. So these are all the Gaelic names that became more anglicised or Englicised over time to what we are familiar with now. Macbeth was a real historical person. He was born in about 1005. He was educated and he was descended from royalty, and by all accounts he was a great fighter too. But he did not look like that painting. That's a romanticised Middle Ages painting. Reports had him having light strawberry blonde reddish hair with a pale reddish complexion. So not like that painting. And he didn't wear a kilt. Kilts are really only about developed into the 1500s, and tartans as well, more 1800s. So Macbeth would not have been dressed like that or fought like that. That's not what it was. This was more of a Highland developed over time, what they would wear from a practical sense. So don't think of Macbeth as wearing a kilt, because he didn't wear a kilt. That's more along the lines of what he would have worn. He lived in a very, very violent time. So for all of the criticism of Macbeth being violent, we need to remember he lived in a violent time. He had family members murdered, even by his own members of his own family. He married a cousin's widow, Gruoch, who becomes Lady Macbeth in the story, and chances are was probably his own cousin at some point. So that was kind of common at the time. So let's not make any jokes about that, even though it's kind of funny. To become king, you had to be elected. And so when Malcolm dies, his son Duncan is elected king, even though Macbeth has a stronger claim to the kingship because of the Celtic tradition of rule. So Macbeth stays a loyal follower of Duncan, and that's despite the fact that Duncan was not the best leader. He was easily talked into a variety of military campaigns that failed, almost completely, totally losing the country to the Vikings in particular. And if not for the likes of Macbeth, the Vikings may actually have conquered. So Macbeth is still loyal, and he's fighting in northern Scotland and does defeat the Vikings, and that's where the play of Macbeth starts. Macbeth has actually just defeated the Vikings in a battle, which he's deemed to have been historically real, and he's travelling back to see the king when he comes across the three witches, and that's where the story starts. And he's sort of manipulated, or however we're going to look at it, and he's travelling off to meet the king, but he's still loyal at this point. But it's actually the king that changes the whole nature of history, because Duncan doesn't trust Macbeth and actually attacks him. And in battle, Duncan is defeated by Macbeth. In the story of Macbeth, Macbeth murders the king in his own bed, but the history was different. Duncan was killed in battle. So that's where Shakespeare takes a historical reality and distorts it and changes it for literary effect. So when we're looking at some of the history of Macbeth, you've got to realise that Shakespeare, the story of Macbeth, is not historically accurate in many instances. So he travels to the ancient capital of Scone. That's not, I was just making a joke there. And in the reality is he does go to Scone, and there he sits on what's called the Stone of Destiny, and all the royalty and leaders of Scotland come and pledge loyalty to Macbeth because they're actually very happy with the idea of Macbeth being king. He should have been king all along. And so they actually say, yep, Macbeth, you are our legitimate king. And Macbeth rules peacefully for 14 years, so much so, and so confidently that he leaves the country and travels to Rome. But at the same time, there's lots of problems in England, and people are leaving England, a group of people called the Normans, and they're coming to Macbeth for shelter, and the English get kind of annoyed about this. And they decide that they want to attack Macbeth because they now have a secret weapon. Yes, dun dun dun, Duncan's son. Get the joke? A lot of the English lords decided that they would want to invade, especially the northern lords of England. And with Malcolm, they invade Scotland and are defeated. In the Shakespeare story, Macbeth is defeated. So that's, again, a history inaccuracy from the Shakespeare story. But this is where story and history kind of blur together. Macbeth turns a little bit nutty. He goes very paranoid and becomes more of a dictator like what we'd see in the story. So much so he likes sitting in the middle of his room and spinning his sword. Okay, I don't know if he actually did do that. I made that up. I thought it, based on this picture, it was kind of funny. And hey, who knows? Maybe Macbeth did like doing that. So a few years later, Malcolm returns, and in a place called Lumphanan, in the northeast of Scotland near the city of Aberdeen, he's defeated. His army is defeated and Malcolm is successful. And in battle, he does this. He beheads Macbeth. So the history of Macbeth and the story of Macbeth both have him being killed by being decapitated. And his body is then taken to the Scottish island of Iona, whereby traditional kings are buried. But there's one story where Macbeth's body is actually buried near the city of Aberdeen, and they don't know exactly where his body is genuinely buried. After that, Macbeth's stepson tries to become king, but it's pretty useless and he's killed by Malcolm. Malcolm becomes King Malcolm III, and this is historical fact. The Queen and Prince Philip are both descended from King Malcolm III. Why? Because the Queen and Prince Philip are third cousins. True story. I'm not joking about that. They are cousins. So in the end, Macbeth's a great story, but let's not use it as history, because Macbeth actually was a pretty good king. He was a creature of his time. He certainly did kill members of his own family. He was responsible for the king's death in battle. But the reality was that that's what life was like. You kind of had to do what you had to do, and if that means killing your own family, hey, who didn't? Hopefully you enjoyed that and got something out of it. I know I learned a lot about Macbeth making this video, and hopefully you got something out of it too. Hopefully, again, it's helped you. Talk to you later.